Long ago, two races ruled over Earth, humans and monsters. One day, war broke out between the two races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. They sealed the monsters underground with a magic spell. Many years later, legends say that those who climb the mountain never return. We've all heard this introduction before. It is the beginning sequence to the RPG Undertale, one of the most groundbreaking video games to come out, ever. Created by Toby, Undertale explores the story of a fallen human who finds themselves within a world of monsters. But what made Undertale so special was that it completely subverted the expectations of a standard RPG, allowing the player to progress through the game peacefully, rather than just destroying anything or anyone who crosses your path as an obstacle. There was that, and also its quirky Earthbound-inspired humor. But, while Undertale and its successor Deltarune would come to be as well, are heavily inspired by games praised such as Earthbound, Touhou Project, Mario & Luigi, Cave Story, Moon, Remix RPG Adventure, and hell, Wikipedia even cites Mr. Bean as inspiring Undertale and Deltarune, despite not being a video game. Well, okay, maybe Mr. Bean does not get talked about a lot, but that's besides the point. There is one game franchise that heavily inspired Toby Fox's work that rarely gets discussed by the Undertale and Deltarune fandom. Brandish. Brandish is a series of dungeon-crawling RPGs created by the also not well-known game studio Nihon Falcom. Falcom is most well known for creating the Ys and Trails franchises, but in the early 90s, Brandish was a prevalent series Falcom worked on. Unfortunately, Brandish was not really a welcomed game, at least not in the West it wasn't. Brandish was first made for PC-98 computers in Japan, but the first two games would see a port for the Super Nintendo, but only the first game had an officially licensed release in 1995, whereas the sequel stayed on the Super Famicom in Japan. Brandish is most known for having a confusing learning curve in the retro video gaming world, with most people understandably being frustrated by the perspective of the game. Brandish games see the player looking at the main protagonist from an overhead view, but when turning left or right, the character doesn't move in those directions. The room itself turns 90 degrees, where the character's back is always facing the viewer. Although certainly a hurdle to get over, in recent times more Super Nintendo fans have given Brandish a shot, and speaking from personal experience, it is definitely possible to get used to the perspective in the game to play it until the very end. But as Brandish flunked in the West, it had a good reception in the East. As mentioned earlier, there are more Brandish games, and each game progressively also has more story to it, which will become very important later on. After Brandish, Falcom released Brandish 2, The Planet Buster, Brandish 3, Spirit of Balkan, and Brandish VT, otherwise known as Brandish 4, Tower of the Sleeping God, for the PC-98. Brandish 2 was given an SNES port, and it also has an English translation patch, which is easy to find online. An English patch for its original PC-98 port was made too. Brandish 4 was re-released for Windows, and of course, the very first Brandish game was completely remade for the PSP and retitled Brandish the Dark Revenant. Alongside the games, Brandish also has warranted enough popularity to have drama CDs, soundtrack releases, and even novels and manga cameos in other Falcom works. But as time went on, Brandish as a series began to fade into obscurity even more as Falcom decided to not work on keeping the franchise active. The main story for Brandish, in all honesty, concluded with the third installment, with the fourth game being more or less a spin-off, which focused on a completely new cast of characters and a new setting. Rarely does Falcom make any mention of Brandish unless it is for something in relation to an anniversary celebration of theirs. But now comes the question, what does this have to do with Toby Fox? How did he take inspiration from this? Well, there is a reason for that. While most of the Undertale and Deltarune community are unaware of Brandish's existence, some members of the community are starting to speak up about it, with even big creators such as Shay making a now-deleted tweet about it as part of a joke. So where do we even start with talking about Brandish's overall influence on Undertale and Deltarune? Well, I think it's safe to say that if you know about some of Toby's past, we know where to likely start. Before Toby made Undertale and Deltarune, and even before Toby went on to become a known composer for the web series Homestuck, Toby was a prominent figure on Starman.net, where he would undergo the username Radiation. Starman.net is a forum space for fans of the Mother series, or Earthbound series, to congregate and just, well, do all things Earthbound. The forum's origin dates all the way back to the late 90s, and in the early 2000s, Toby would partake in the ROM hacking side of the community. ROM hacking is no easy task, but as someone who had already had experience with RPG Maker, Toby was able to figure out the ROM hack tooling system for Earthbound called PK Hack fairly well. He was one of the few members of the community at the time who knew how to make custom music too, something he would take advantage of in his well-known and nowadays mostly frowned upon Earthbound Halloween Hack. Before the Halloween Hack, Toby made another ROM hack called Arn's Winter Quest, which is talked about even less than the Halloween Hack since, well, Halloween Hack is also currently noted for utilizing concepts that would become popular in both Undertale and Deltarune. If you would like to know a good amount of what Arn's Winter Quest has to offer, I'd recommend the video Toby Fox's First Game is Terrible? By Audiospawn Sudsy Bubbles. But with all this Earthbound talk, where does Brandish come into play? Well, let's look at his Halloween Hack. From the very start, you'll notice that something has changed. The main protagonist is different. Instead of playing as Ness, you instead play as a lonely bounty hunter and swordsman named Varik. As you could tell, Varik here is the main protagonist of Brandish as well. He's also called Ares, so there's that fun fact, but we'll stick to calling him Varik since that's his more popular name. There actually seems to be a small misconception sometimes that Varik is actually Toby's OC based off of Ares from Brandish, when in fact, Varik and Ares are the same character. The reason he has two different names is because Ares is the name given to him in Brandish's original releases, with Varik being the localized name given to him for Nintendo of America's release of the first Brandish on SNES. Yeah, Nintendo censored a good chunk of Brandish 1. But that aside, why is Varik here? If we look at Toby's The Making of HTML doc for how he coded the Halloween Hack, he explains that when he was first drafting the plans of making the Halloween Hack for the Starman.net 2008 Halloween Fun Fest, he originally just wanted to hack Earthbound into Brandish 1 because Toby quotes,
"Originally, I just wanted to make a Brandish hack because Brandish is pretty Halloweeny already. It has a creepy life or death atmosphere about it."
However, as time went on, Toby began to formulate even more ideas that would turn EBHH into the story it became today. Toby also quotes right after,
"Then I thought of the anodes thing, and I figured that Varik was as good of a silent protagonist as any to fill the role, alright."
So, Varik's appearance in the Halloween Hack ended up being a remnant of a different idea Toby had, but Brandish's influence on EBHH doesn't just stop with Varik being the main player character. But first, let's briefly discuss what the Halloween Hack is about, for those who don't know it beyond the final boss. The hack takes place in an alternate timeline of Earthbound, where after Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, the main party members of the original game, never returned to the present world after defeating the antagonist of the game, Gygus. I mean, come on, everyone knows who Gygus is. Even if you don't know him, you've at least seen him before. I digress. Since the Chosen Four didn't come back to the present through the phase disorder, remember this for later, the story now sees the town of Tucson, a location in Earthbound, weeping over the events of the loss of the heroes. Or, well, some of them are. Most of the NPCs in Tucson are interesting, to say the least. But I absolutely love the humor Toby went with for Tucson's dialogue. It's weird and out of pocket for no reason. After the intro, we open up to Varik in Ness's bed. We hear the classic meteorite crash like in the original game, and then we hear a cover of Brandish 2's stage clear theme called Synchronicity. So yeah, as also confirmed in the making of doc, Toby states that he really likes the music when referring to Brandish. He also confirms he's not too proud of his cover of the song, but thinks it came out fine enough in PK Hack's EB Mused. Varik wakes up from the opening sequence as it's merely a foggy dream he has as he is passed out drunk. Side note, that is random though, but there is another Brandish reference with the items Varik has on his person. He starts off with leather armor and a silent dagger. In Brandish games, you also start off with leather armor, and in many art pieces, Varik is shown to carry a dagger on one of his belts. Back to the main story, Varik gets dragged out from the bar after puking and is thrusted into an adventure by the ex-mayor of Onet, who now wants to run as mayor in Tucson, B.H. Perkle. Perkle informs Varik of how there have been sightings of monsters in the town, with in particular one eating and mutilating a little girl's parents. Yikes, not fun. So Perkle essentially forces Varik to go on this journey to find the monster and kill it. Now, I don't intend to do an in-depth analysis of the Halloween hack's connections to Undertale and Deltarune specifically, but if you play through the hack, you'll notice the theme of "your choices have no meaning" is prevalent throughout the story. Varik is his own character, being controlled by you, the player, and you force him to go through this trek. This trek full of bloody monsters, and later down the line, borderline depression and guilt. In fact, EBHH is so depressing that its description for the game titles it as the most descriptive, shocking, and psychologically warping version of Earthbound you will ever play. After traveling through bloody sewers and a wasteland version of Winters, Varik finds himself at Dr. Anonuts' laboratory. Varik finds out that Anonuts is the monster he must kill. Dr. Anonuts created these monsters to set them free and kill people because, in his mind, the world is just not worth it to him anymore. Not after he built the Phase Distorter and sent his son Jeff with his friends into the past to defeat Gygus and never returning to the present. When Dr. Anonuts flees into his Magicant, a world where one's mind becomes a physical realm, Varik is given two, but technically one, but actually two options, since one of them is secret and gives the player access to the rest of the game's story. Varik can either kill Anonuts now, where he sits in the machine, and then the game will end, or the player can press the B button and Varik will enter Anonuts' Magicant. In Magicant, Varik needs to recruit Anonuts' courage. He must go through 3 doors to meet the rest of Ness's friends. In order to meet Paula, Varik fights the No 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 boss, which represents Anonuts' closeted homosexuality. In order to recruit Jeff, Varik and Paula fight the Darkheart boss, which represents Anonuts' relationship with his wife and Jeff falling apart. And lastly, Varik, Paula, and Jeff fight the Phase Distorter to find Pooh. With all of Anonuts' courage found and tagging alongside Varik, the 4 set off through Magicant to face off Anonuts himself. This is the part that the Halloween hack is most well known for. The final boss against Dr. Anonuts, and understandably so. Before Undertale and Homestuck, this was the very first origin of the song Megalovania. The song that would go on to be remixed for Homestuck and then rearranged for Undertale and even Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a partial Brandish reference. Toby says that he originally wanted to use the song Megalomania from Live a Live, which is correct no doubt, and he did also shout whatever he felt like into a mic. But most don't know that Megalovania is also inspired by Brandish 2's final boss theme, Gatto Batterer. Gatto Batterer also has a shit ton of covers and remixes, so it is also the most popular Brandish song as well, likely because of Undertale. Anyways, after defeating the id of Anonuts' mind, this is where Megalovania plays. Dr. Anonuts angrily charges at Varik and the others, but in the end, he remains defeated. Regardless of if you press the B button or not, Anonuts will always die, and EBHH will treat you sorta like a piece of shit for doing so. But nonetheless, Varik leaves the lab after being traumatized from Anonuts' mind. No doubt, there's no way he doesn't have PTSD, and gets picked up by a SWAT team who airlift him back to Tucson. Varik sits on his bed, thinking to himself about life, how he's just a bounty hunter, and how he's just gonna probably drink and sleep with a woman again after everything he just did. Actually, it's interesting really. Even though Varik is from Brandish, and even though Toby wanted Varik to be a blank slate like in the original games for his hack, Toby accidentally gave Varik even more character here than in the actual Brandish games, which is extremely funny, especially since Toby quotes this.
Although I kind of inadvertently gave him a personality with the ending there, I really didn't mean to. Total accident, I swear. Varik is a blank slate. Anyways, Varik is a cool name.
Going back to the other Brandish references, remember how I mentioned Varik's equipment throughout the game? Well, he can also get his ultimate gear in the Halloween hack's second half. The soul armor, the star shield, and of course, the fabled Planet Buster, which is going to be important for another detail later in this video. Another thing Brandish inspired in EBHH was the writing style for whenever Varik entered a new area. Toby was inspired by the stage clear segments that are present throughout all of the main trilogy Brandish games. Toby had this to say about it.
The other main Brandish reference is the descriptions before each new area, at least in the beginning of the game. In Brandish, it would always have a partially animated picture with a cool description while playing Synchronicity. Brandishes weren't excessively long or descriptive like mine, usually just like 6 to 8 sentences, but they always touched me in a really cool, primal way, so I wanted to emulate that. One of the lines is pretty much gimped from when you enter the fortress in the original Brandish. A huge technical castle with gleaming eye walls with some kick-ass synth music. I love Brandish. I love being a little bounty hunter knight that jumps around and slays things. It's a good feeling.
Now, you would think that this is the end of the Halloween Hack section, but it actually isn't, believe it or not. We need to dig deeper into Toby's other past works. As it turns out, there's another small game he made where attention must be brought to pp.exe. Yes, that's correct. pp.exe. That's the actual name. pp.exe is more or less... okay, it's weird, but it can be inferred that it may be some sort of sequel to the Earthbound Halloween Hack. This time, it was made through RPG Maker 2000, but it was submitted for the 2008 Holiday Fun Fest on Starman.net as well. To sum it up, Ness wants to confess to Paula about his feelings and all that. There's also an Odie fight, but let's get to the part that we need to talk about, because this game somehow explains why Varik exists within the Earthbound timeline. Now, from earlier we know why from a developer standpoint, but this time we've got some juicy story elements. At some point in the story, Ness will meet Dr. Anonuts, who begins to quote his opening line from EBHH, but then stops as he gets serious with Ness. He says the following:
A long time ago, Nevrik was a prosperous town. But a few years ago, there was a disturbance in the space-time continuum. A man named Varik appeared in our universe. How or why he appeared is unknown. But his mere premise is causing massive ripples through time and space. Listen, Ness. This place is where people go to die. Time has started to crack and split. The past now exists in the future. The future now exists in the past.
Okay, we have a lot to unpack here. Varik is an anomaly within Toby's little pre-Undertale universe here. But where have we heard this before? That's right, in Undertale. And forgive me, because I'm going to be giving my own hypothesis here when it's been a hot minute since I played Deltarune. But personally, this scene here, to my personal view, is what also validates the theory that in Deltarune, Sans and Papyrus will somehow end up in Undertale's world. I'll explain. In Undertale, Sans and Papyrus have a very mysterious background. We can of course tell this from the dialogue throughout the game. Sans' genocide fight dialogue talks a lot about the anomaly and how he has given up trying to go back a long time ago. But the dialogue I really want to shed some light on is the Snoted Shopkeeper's dialogue. When speaking to her about the Skeleton Brothers, she has this to say:
And if you're bored, you can go sit outside and watch those wacky skeletons do their thing. There's 2 of them, brothers, I think. They just shot up one day and asserted themselves.
I know, it may be a stretch, but if this theory proves to be true in Deltarune's future installments, which as of the time of writing this script is being made before chapters 3 and 4 come out, then hey, maybe not. My personal theory is that this idea of Sans Papyrus being these sort of time interlopers is potentially inspired off of Toby's old works of Varik being one within Earthbound's timeline. Because why not? There's also another Brandish reference towards the end of the game. Ness can interact with a painting in his hallways which reads,
This painting was apparently found in a ruin somewhere. It looks like the person wearing blue armor is fighting with a frightening monster.
Varik is depicted wearing blue armor in most artwork from Brandish, and the implication that the painting was found in a ruin also implies this painting was referring to the final boss in Brandish 1, since the first Brandish game also takes place in an underground world. But those similarities will be discussed soon enough. Also, while not necessarily a huge big deal to refer to, pp.exe in itself also debunks a popular theory about the Halloween Hack, the one where Ness and Varik are the same character. Throughout the Halloween Hack, there are multiple dialogue cues that imply that Varik may be a future version of Ness as an adult. But there are just many contradictions to this theory even without PP confirming it. It just doesn't make sense that Ness would suddenly become a grown adult within the time period that Halloween Hack takes place in after Earthbound. Ness is confirmed to be 13 in Earthbound, and when taking Brandish into account, Varik is 26 in the second game's events, 27 in Brandish 3 as well. Even without Varik's age being confirmed, the game still shows you he was clearly an adult. He drinks beer, sleeps with women, and works as a bounty hunter, which a kid wouldn't be able to do. Since EBHH is only a couple of months after Earthbound, then how would a 13-year-old boy be able to become a 26-year-old man within that time frame? It wouldn't make sense to say the phase distorter, because that machine seemingly has no effect on age. Plus, based on other dialogue in the hack, Pooh implies that himself, as well as Paula, Jeff, and Ness, are still alive in the past timeline that they were sent to. So this means that Ness can't be Varik if that's the case. So if Ness and Varik really aren't one and the same, then what's with the potential implications that they are the same? Well, I think Toby means Varik and Ness are the same not by literally being the same character, but rather through the player. EBHH is made for people who know Earthbound and have played it before. So, since it's the same player who once controlled Ness, now that player is controlling Varik, thus leading to them being the same. Well, now I think I can finally conclude the topics about Brandish's influence on Toby's previous, more obscure works. But I really hope that these sections shed a lot of insight into what Toby's non-Undertale and Deltarune works were, especially since they aren't talked about that much. And buckle up because we're going to see how this bleeds into his current creations nowadays. Now we're talking. This is what you guys have been waiting for the most. How Brandish as a series connects to Undertale. Well, where do we begin? Oh, I don't know. The whole plot? Now, of course, I'm not going to go ahead and say that Brandish beat Undertale to what it did as a story, but the setting is. In Undertale, you play as Frisk, pretty basic stuff that most people know about already. You control them going through the underground, either making friends or killing monsters, and sometimes doing both. But Toby confirms that Brandish 1's idea of the setting being in an underground land inspired him for Undertale. Let's also take a look at the beginning of Brandish. In the opening, we are given a backstory on how the ruler of a nation called Vitoria named King Barabbas, remember him for later, wanted to expand his power by taking it from a dragon that guarded a tower, which kept Vitoria peaceful. When Barabbas sent his soldiers in front of him to kill the dragon did not resist the king's order to execute him, and gave him the power he desired. But this cost Barabbas his entire nation, as he turned into a monster and his kingdom sunk into the ground. In the present day, we see Varik once again observing the crater that leads to this underground nation. But he isn't alone, as his arch-nemesis shows up. There's another character that I haven't mentioned yet from the Brandish series, but she will be brought up later, so I might as well introduce her here. Meet Alexis, or more commonly known as Della. Much like how Varik has his other name Ares because of the localization stuff, Della's localized American name was Alexis. But nobody really calls her that. Us 10 Brandish fans in the world stick to calling her Della, and we still refer to Ares as Varik since it's more iconic. But I digress. Della has been wanting to get revenge on Varik since she witnessed him murder her teacher, a powerful sorcerer named Balkan. Yeah, murder is kinda bad. You shouldn't do that, Varik. Della tries to kill Varik, but her fire magic shoots into the crater instead, and it causes the both of them to fall into the underground. And yes, I know what this panel looks like, you don't need to tell me. I will get to that when we talk about Deltarune. But let's see where Varik wakes up. Yeah, the ruins. That's right. The idea of both an underground world and the first area being the ruins is straight up a Brandish reference. Toby confirms this in the art book by saying this under the map01.png image.
Original sketches for the layout of the ruins. A few people have picked up on this, but the ruins and the idea of being trapped in the underground as a whole were inspired by Brandish, SNES.
Remember how I said to remember that King Barabbas guy from earlier too? Well, if we do some more digging into the art book, we can find that under asgorearlyconcept.png, Toby wrote this.
I tried drawing his battle sprite from the bottom right first. He was kind of like a combination of Sinstrel and King Berbers from Brandish.
And while what I'm about to mention next is currently just speculation due to Toby not outright confirming it, Asgore isn't the only character whose design was inspired by Brandish. If we take a look at Papyrus, you'll notice that his battle body seemingly has a similar shape to it that is similar to Varik's armor. Additionally, he wears a red scarf, which Varik also has. Varik's armor may have potentially inspired Undyne's armor design too. If you look at most images of her, you won't see a resemblance, but if we focus specifically on the little buddy figurine of her that you can find on Fangamer, we could see a small resemblance to the arch design on Varik's armor for Undyne. If we take a look at Omega Flowey, the design somewhat reminds me of Brandish 1's final boss, Gatto Bistal. Mainly, it's the arms that make me think this. And going back to the art book one last time, we see that Toby had made an original design for Frisk that is now scrapped, but was called Hero. Hero has been becoming more popular within the community, but very few people seem to know that Hero is actually carrying the Planet Buster, Varik's signature sword. Hero is also wearing the Soul Armor, which is another piece of equipment Varik can wear. Underneath the menu mockup 1 status.png image, Toby writes,
I wonder if anyone likes Brandish.
Well, Toby, I do, and there's certainly some other people who do too. Moving on from character design similarities, very few people notice this, but both Undertale and Deltarune have been inspired by Brandish's shop layout. In fact, the setup in Toby's games is practically the same as in Brandish. In Brandish, you have the options to buy, sell, and most interesting of all, talk to the shopkeepers. If we look at Undertale's shop layout, it's exactly the same options. The only difference is that the placement of buy and sell are swapped. There is another reference to the shop in Deltarune, but I will cover that later. Speaking of mechanics though, Undertale has a dimensional box mechanic which allows the player to place extra items in there to free up space in your inventory. The same mechanic is present in all 3 Brandish games, and the name Dimensional Box is still the same too. However, I believe you can only collect 2 dimensional boxes in Undertale, whereas you can get 3 in Brandish games. A puzzle in the ruins is also inspired by one found in Brandish 1. In Undertale, Frisk comes across the falling leaf puzzle, where you must take the correct path of leaves to reach the end of the room and avoid stepping on any leaf patches that will cause you to fall into a basement room. Brandish has the same thing, except in order to solve the puzzle, the player has likely made Varik collect the Steel Balls item. The Steel Balls help the player identify which holes are the ones not to fall down in. The last mechanic is speculative, but the rotating room puzzle, also found in the ruins, may be a reference to the perspective in Brandish games mentioned earlier, where when turning Varik, instead of him turning in another direction, the room itself turns at an instant 90-degree angle. There isn't too many songs that are confirmed to be inspired by Brandish and Undertale specifically, but as stated earlier, Megalovania was inspired by Gato Batterer from Brandish 2. But besides that, Clamgirl mentions the word synchronicity, which is a reference to another Brandish song I mentioned when discussing the Halloween hack. Toby also confirms that an original version of the song Power of Neo was partially inspired by the song Ending 2 from Brandish 1. Toby quotes,
I still like the last half of the song. The guitar section was inspired by Brandish's song Ending 2. All of it is pretty placeholder though.
The next song is also speculation, but there is a chance that the core theme may also be inspired specifically by the Brandish the Dark Revenant release of the Fortress theme. Older versions of the song sound less like the core though. And lastly, Gato Batterer also seems to have inspired the song Stronger Monsters, which can be accessed through Undertale's hard mode. There's still some other miscellaneous influences that Brandish had on Undertale. In the Legends of Localization book that is also available on Fangamer, there's a small section dedicated to Brandish when referring to a single translation line in Alphys' lab. When interacting with the lab's dark walls, the text will read, "It's too dark to see near the walls." The line is taken directly from Brandish 1, when Varik enters a dungeon called the Dark Zone. According to the novel, a small note quotes that Toby stated that it wasn't mandatory for the wording to be exact, but the translation team still went further to make the Brandish iteration of the quote possible. But the book also states that multiple versions of Brandish 1 have varying texts of the line, but Undertale quotes the one from the PC Engine port.
In short, it's clear that this generic English line is very important to Toby, and the localization team took that importance seriously.
Well, with that out of the way, this concludes all of Brandish's specific influences on only Undertale. Let's move on to Deltarune. Well, I might as well get this out of the way. That one cutscene I showed off earlier in the Brandish 1 opening is the clear inspiration for the cutscene in Deltarune's first chapter, where Chris and Susie fall down into the Dark World. Not only is it pretty easy to see this visual similarity, but Toby also publicly confirmed this in his own words during the Undertale 6th anniversary stream, where members of Fangamer played Deltarune Chapter 1.
Really good atmospheric game.
I love the scaling on the fall.
Yeah, that's just
This falling portion is also inspired by Brandish. We're not gonna talk more about that.
Oh, okay.
Not exactly sure why Toby didn't want to elaborate on anything more about Brandish's influence, but my guess is that it's likely in relation to him not wanting to get into any potential discussion of the Halloween hack. The next most obvious detail that many were probably waiting for me to say by now also is that Chris's Dark World design specifically bears a striking resemblance to Varik's design. Both have the haircut that covers their eyes, armor, boots, and gloves, and a cape or a scarf. Plus, as pointed out in another review of the Halloween hack by Maycon, Chris's Dark World color palette is actually a swap of Varik's, so that checks out. Chris is basically Toby's version of reusing Varik as a protagonist again, with some clear differences of course. Another interesting detail about both Varik and Chris is that Chris's hair is brown in the light world, and blue in the dark world. Varik's actual hair color in Brandish is clearly meant to be brown as well, but for some reason, a good amount of the graphics in early Brandish games, and even in some promotional art of him, depict him with blue hair. My guess as to why Varik's hair is blue is likely because of color palette limitations, and a mistake got carried over into other Brandish media, but I really can't say for sure. Anyways, my new Deltarune theory is that Varik is the knight and that he is Chris's biological father, and I think it's also pretty safe to say that Deltarune may be some sort of remaster of the Halloween hack. Digging into more character designs, this gets pretty speculative again, but Noelle's Dark World design seems to also look similar to the character Mirelle's design, Della's sister who appears in Brandish 3. I actually never realized this until my friend LOL MeowAJ pointed this out, so special thanks to her for that. And simply by judging Birdley's Dark World sprite, for some reason his outfit looks somewhat similar to Carl's armor from Brandish 2. Going back to the shop reference earlier, I mainly talked about for Undertale, Schaum's shop theme is inspired by the song Shop 1 from Brandish 1. In fact, some of the note patterns from the Shop 1 song is straight up just in Schaum's theme. Found out about this one through Relax Alex's video about Toby's music inspirations, where he actually does dedicate a section to Brandish in the video, which I appreciate very much. Speaking of Relax Alex, he also pointed out some other really interesting comparisons, albeit in a joking way, between Brandish, Undertale, and Deltarune that I never even thought of at first when I was making this video. I suppose I should have reserved this one small point for the Undertale section, but better late than never I suppose. The Once Upon a Time opening in Undertale does look quite similar to the opening sequences in Brandish games, same goes for the Legend cutscene in Deltarune. Brandish 1's opening also mentions Eternal Darkness, which I don't think I need to explain what that is. Taking a look at a Tumblr blog by Jugular Beat, sorry if I mispronounced that, they mentioned how some of Chris's behavior and personality can even be connected back to Varik's actions in Brandish games. Despite their status as enemies, Varik has saved Della on multiple occasions in Brandish, and in Chapter 1 of Deltarune we see Chris save Susie from the king, despite Susie bullying Chris earlier in the story. Jugular Beat also cites how both Varik and Chris like to play pranks, as Chris has done so to Noelle multiple times, and in Brandish 2's ending, Varik gives Della a broken planet buster after Della gets him to cough it up due to a deal they made earlier in the game. One last point they bring up is that they believe that the Titan Rouse theory is supported by Brandish 2, but I think I'll let you take a gander at that yourselves. I'll be linking my sources in the description. If we dig into some more in-depth Deltarune lore, we can find out about a game called Dragon Blazers, but if we look closely, we can see that this fictional game soundtrack has a track named Glacier, which is also a track found in Brandish 3's OST. Personally, I wonder if Dragon Blazers is another way of Toby interjecting the Brandish series into Deltarune's world as a video game itself. Brandish does have a lot of art with dragons as well, despite the game's stories not really focusing on them too much, for some strange reason. Although speaking of Brandish 3, I ended up finding something really interesting that I think people would like to speculate on, especially since I have seen nobody ever talk about this before. Upon taking a look at the Brandish 3 guidebook, which I happen to own as a massive Brandish fan, one of the first pages shows a picture of the four main characters, Varik, Della, and two other ones called Umber and Jinza, standing atop a cliff with their backs facing the viewer. But when I saw this, all it made me think of was the menu screen in Deltarune. Given some evidence that I'll explain later that Toby has played Brandish 3, I would not put this past him as a reference. If this is wrong though, it's a damn good coincidence. Well, this concludes the majority of the video. I really hope that this brought a lot of insight to, well, anyone who watches this, really. And for the small amount of Brandish fans watching this, I hope y'all are pleased with this video. I did my absolute best to get every scrap of information I could get, even if it may just be speculation. Brandish really deserves to be talked about more, regardless of its connections with Undertale and Deltarune, because, of course, I think it's a really neat series. I've been researching Brandish for a long time now, and as my friend LOLMeowAJ says that she is the Earthbound Halloween Hack lore master, I personally think that I am that for Brandish. There's so many neat details that I've found, and I've even come across some things by Toby that I've never even expected to find myself. As I was watching some old Brandish videos that have been uploaded to YouTube around 16 to 18 years ago, Toby has actually left some comments on them under his old Fwug Radiation account. Like this one, for instance, where he says, "Classy as hell, my friend." Toby, what does this mean? Is this going to be in the new chapters? Anyways, another little fun fact that most don't know is that Toby has actually participated in the Brandish 2 SNES English patch as a beta tester and QA guy, which does make sense because he did show off screenshots of Brandish 2's translation when he was explaining ROM hacking to his audience in another making of doc for the Halloween hack. User Depanosekai on Reddit replied to a post called Brandish 2 Undertale on r/Falcom, where they state,
Actually, I translated Brandish for SFC. Toby was our QA guy. He had a fantastic Let's Play series on YouTube at the time. Highly enjoyable. He knew everything about that game. He wrote our marketing pitches and debugged the shit out of our patches.
While this Let's Play of Toby's is now lost, as we can't seem to find it, one of the trailers for Brandish 2's SNES English patch can be found still, and I'm gonna assume that this was done by Toby, or that at the very least he had a say in making this. So if this assumption was correct, this means that Toby would have pitched the idea of the phrases, "Brandish will f*** you up," and "Brandish 2 the mother planet buster, not for This is wonderful writing that can rival Shakespeare, guys. There's even a post on Starman.net where Toby talks about how he got Brandish in the first place, where he tried to rent it from Home Vision Video but was offered Thomas the Tank Engine on SNES instead, due to them not selling rental games. This lore detail is extremely important because this in fact confirms that Thomas the Tank Engine is canon to Brandish now. Besides those fun facts, I've got nothing else to yap about. It's really good to come back and make another video on my own channel. I'm really sorry that I haven't been as active. That's mainly due to me working on the Undertale Yellow Halloween Hack project, which I promoted in one of my other videos, but my friends and I have been putting a shit ton of effort into it, especially me since I'm the one who films and edits everything and is the one who makes all the props. Trust me, this is hard work. It'd mean a lot if y'all could take some time to watch it, leave some comments, and then spread it around. But yeah, as of right now, this is probably going to be the most comprehensive discussion about Toby's relationship with Brandish, and this is not even all of it because the rest of Deltarune still needs to come out. So, with that, sans is Ness. Have a good day.